And again, this is Fredrick Kenniston, the Director of Delivery at Axiom, and I'm going to be giving you the How to Become a MicroStation Guru webinar. This is one that we've delivered a number of times over a number of years, and it's oriented to give people data about different tools in MicroStation. And in this particular webinar, I'm going to cover the V8i environment, but then also I'm going to segue a bit and show you where the equivalent tools are in the Connect environment for those of you that are more oriented to that or actually head into that environment. And the purpose of this is to show you where these tools are and give you some data about them so that you on your own, as you run into things in your production environment, can go and work with these particular things I'm going to show you to help configure some things to make it a bit more efficient to work in MicroStation, to do some things like use a command list file where you can run kind of a batch routine setup to make modifications to files for settings in them, like view attributes and things like that, plus VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications macros, and batch conversion, and key-in commands and function keys as well. So the idea being that I'm not going to be able to go into detail of each and every specific category or area I just mentioned, but I'm going to point out some things where, with a little bit of look around and figure out and a little bit of study in some cases, like with VBA, you can learn more and more things that will allow you to solve some production issues that you run into, which over time, the more you work with those tools and do things like that, you will become a guru. It's just a matter of taking what I'm going to show you as the start, and then you on your own building on your knowledge and skills to help different things in your work environment. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into MicroStation V8i. And in this environment, the tools that I'm going to concentrate on are all under what's called the Utilities menu. Now, what I'm going to do is, as I go into each one, I'll then quickly go into the Connect environment and show you where the tools are there, because the Utilities ribbon panel in Connect has changed a bit, so that the tools that, a number of the tools that are on this Utilities menu in V8i, they aren't in the Utilities panel in Connect. In fact, some are in various different places. But I'll show you that as I go. So the first thing I'm going to do is cover the key-in commands. So when I go to Utilities key-in, this is your key-in browser. In fact, let me go back to the menu here. So it's Utilities key-in. And this key-in browser is a key-in input field. For those of you familiar with AutoCAD, where it's more command line driven than MicroStation, then this is pretty much the equivalent of what you would find in the command line driven environment for AutoCAD. This allows you to give commands to MicroStation, and pretty much everything in the different dialog boxes for the tools has a key-in commands associated with it. That includes the reference file attachments area, the references, including raster references, and the other commands as well, plus things like place line and change things like view attributes and things like that are all available to you in different key-in commands. Now, this view of the key-in browser, I'll pull it down here a bit. Normally, you'll see it collapse down to an input field. Now, this is where you would type in commands. For example, if I said place line and then press the Enter key, then it puts MicroStation into place line mode. You'll see down here in the lower left in the status area, it says place line, enter first point. So I could then click with the mouse and then finish and place a line. So that was using a key-in command to initiate the place line. Now, if I pull down, another thing about this, often if you see people that have this particular collapse down to one field key-in browser open, you'll often see it might be docked at the top or the bottom here too. But you can also have it float. You can just pull it off from those areas as well. Now I'm going to pull down once more on this, and here you'll see on the left, these are the basic commands to start. So when I click place, or when I typed in place, notice it gave me place. And then these other areas, these window areas, are for arguments that if there are additional arguments for a particular command that you type in, it'll then show you. So it kind of gives you help on what's available for you to be able to work with this particular tool. Like you can place and then say place arc. And if you click arc, notice it then gives you extra parameters to further modify which tool that you're going to use, or the aspect of the tool you're going to use. And if there was additional arguments after that, it would then show you here in this fourth panel as well. Now, in addition to that, if I pull down again, it then also gives you a history of commands. Now, the reason I show you this is because in the next segment I'm going to go into, something called the batch processor, you can actually use these key-in commands to put together basically a text file that you can then run through the batch processor to do things like make bulk modifications to different aspects of design files all at the same time. Like, let's say you had a project and you needed to turn on text in the view attributes in a certain view, then you could do that with the next thing I'm going to show you with the batch processor. But this is where that starts. So with that in mind, now I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to clear this out. And one thing that you can do in this input field is if you push the up arrow or down arrow, as the case may be, notice it gives you commands. What it does is it populates this field when you push the up arrows and then the down arrows with past commands from the history area. The reason it does this, or the reason I'm pointing it out actually, is so that you can get commands that maybe have been entered in the past, highlight them, and then do a copy. And then later, when I get into the batch processor, you can then paste that into your batch processor command file, and then you can build that command file from the key-in commands that were entered here in the past. You can also use this to help you figure out what commands that you want to use or be able to put in the batch processing file by typing in a command and seeing what arguments it gives you, and then based on the arguments, you lay out the command the way you want, copy the whole command with all its arguments, and then put that in the batch processor file as well. Now, if I go to, since I was mentioning view attributes earlier, I'm going to go to the view attributes menu here off the secret menu by clicking the little dot here in the corner. And then here's view attributes. And notice it's got fill turned on. So I'm going to turn it off for the moment through the mouse-driven interface. And the things that you see here can be turned on and off for different views using key-in commands. Now, the only other aspect of this that you have to care for when you're doing that type of thing, particularly when you're then later maybe doing batch processing using the batch processor with commands from the key-in commands in the batch processing file, is after you make changes, you'll want to issue a command to save the changes to the view attributes. Now, using that or not depends on how you have MicroStation set up. For example, I have MicroStation set up so that as changes are made, if I close the design file, it then saves the settings automatically. And then when I go back, if I change things in the view attributes, it would then show those changes because they would be saved. But they aren't saved by default. So for example, if I turn fill on and I didn't have that as my default setting in MicroStation, and I just close the design file, the next time I open the design file without that saved, this would then be off the next time I open the design file. So through your settings, or preferences, you can tell it whether to save the files or save the settings in the files when you close, or if not, then you'll have to explicitly care for that in a key-in command batch processing file in order to save the settings. The way you do that, or the command for that, is file. Let me see, file. If I can spell, file design. So that actually came from way back in the Intergraph days, and the idea was that you're done with the design file, and now you're, quote, going to file it. So when you file something, you take all the papers and you put them in the folder, and then you go put it in the file cabinet. That's where that kind of came from. So now with that in mind, what I'm going to do is I'm going to issue some key-in commands here to change that fill attribute here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go set, and then notice when I set, or when I put set in, it then gave me the arguments, and so I'm going to go set, let's say fill, so I can either select it here or I can type it in, and I'm going to say on. So now with that on, or that entered, I'll click enter, and now when you look in the lower left in the status area, it says fill display on, select view. Now the way you select view with the mouse-driven interface is you would click a data point in the view, whatever view it is that you wanted to set the fill on in. But since we're in the key-in browser, I'm going to use key-in command to do so. And the way you do that is it's cell view, so that's select view, space, and then you can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or combos of those, or 1-4, for example, would say do this for views 1 through 4, or you can say all, as the case may be too. All would set fill on in all the views. So I'm just going to say 1 for the moment. Press enter. And now notice it's not set here in the view attributes dialog box yet. So there's one more command that you have to do here, and that's update 1. So in this case, you're then saying set the fill on in view 1 and then update the view 1. Now, why didn't it go here? So now I'm going to close this, and then I go back. I forgot here. And now you see the fill is turned on. So it would have updated the view, but in this case, because I had the view attributes dialog box open, it doesn't dynamically update. I forgot that aspect. So I just had to go redisplay that view attributes dialog box, and then you see now fill is on. Now, if I needed to then add a command to save that setting, I would then use the file design like I showed you before. Press enter. And then notice in the lower left status area, it does say the settings are saved. So if I close this design file now, even though I have the default set it so that it would save the settings when I close it, if I close it, and then come back, and then you go back to my view attributes, here you see fill is on. So that's just one aspect of using key-in commands to make changes, in this case to settings of a design file, but even things like if I go to settings, design file, you can also change settings here with the appropriate key-in command. And to give you help on that and what commands that you have available, I'm going to go to Help, Contents, and then at the bottom here, again, this is V8i, actually this is, V8i oriented. So notice it says MicroStation V8i, Select Series 10, Help Key-in Index. So when you click that, that opens up this little window here, and this gives you a list of all the different key-in commands that are available for you in MicroStation. There's tons of them. Even I haven't used all of them yet. But if you want help for them, then you could click things like, there's key-in commands for reference files, for example, for attaching references and handling other aspects like changing the level symbology and the level display, that sort of thing. So I'll type reference and then click apply. And so now any of the commands dealing with references, you'll then find here. And if you, let me go back here, reference, where's the attach one? I'll just put reference attach here. So when I click reference attach, it then gives you help for that particular key-in command. And then in the different brackets and stuff that it gives you, it then gives you a lot of help on what it's expecting for each one of the input areas that you see in the command. So this then expands on what you would find in the key-in browser. It gives you more data about this particular command and what you could do with it and what data does it expect, that sort of thing, and the different parameters for it too. Now, since I've shown you that in the V8i environment, I'm going to go to MicroStation Connect, and on the Home tab, in my drawing workflow here, you'll see This is where your key in browser is under the primary tools. So when I click that, notice it's the same key in browser, same, collapse it and expand it as needed so you can see the history and the help of the commands. And the help file, though, is a little bit different in Connect. In fact, let me see here. So when you go Help, Contents, here, and then go Help Contents, it opens it up in a web page. And instead of, it doesn't make it real easy for you to find, except if you look in the lower left, the key in command index is now accessible here with Connect. And you click that, and then and you can search for terms related to those key in commands through here, through the search field in the upper right. But then you can also just scroll down here, and if I go back to reference, for example, attach, I see where it is here, and I miss it. Reference clip, there it is, reference attach, boom. And then it gives you, in a slightly different form, all the data about reference file attachment. And it gives you information that if the key in command has something specific for the Connect environment, then it would give you updated data on that key in command and use in that environment, in the Connect environment. So that's a little bit of data on key in commands. And before I get into the batch processor, you can also use this data to help make things a bit more efficient in your design work when you're using function keys and things like that, when you're doing drawing and things like that. So what we'll do is this, is I'm going to place a line, and actually let me get back to the V8i environment here. And I'll show you what you can do with this. So I'll say place line, and then I'll start, and I've got AccuSnap on. Now, one thing I could do with the key in command here, the reason I'm showing you this one is because I'm going to do something special with it in a second, is I'm going to say AccuSnap toggle. I'm going to press enter, and now, did it take it? Let's see. Do it again. Yeah. So notice now my AccuSnap is off. So as if I needed, for example, to place this line close to this particular circle here, instead of snapping to the center, which AutoSnap was doing earlier, then I could, place it where I want. And then when I'm done, I can go back and I can say AccuSnap toggle again. And then if I go to place another line, it'll be set back and it'll snap wherever the AccuSnaps are set. Now, you can use this in terms of function keys. So if I go to utility or workspace, actually, function keys. So here's the different function keys that you have available to you in MicroStation. If I scroll down here, there's a bunch of different ones. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that command, AccuSnap toggle. I'm going to assign it to my function key 12. Now, before you take these different function keys and start adding different key in commands to them to modify it, what I recommend you do is find your function key menu, and if I go to disk here, notice for MicroStation V8i, it's going to be stored on their C drive, program data, Bentley, MicroStation V8i, select series, workspace, interfaces, F keys, short for function keys. And this funkkey.mnu is your function key menu file. It's a text file, so I could right click on it, for example, and edit it with a text editor. You can edit it directly. But the reason I'm showing you this here is so you can also make a copy of it. So Control-C, Control-V. That way you can then modify it either through the interface that I was showing you here, which I'll go back to in just a second, or you can modify it directly here and save it. That way you have a backup of the original default function key menu file, so that if you mess something up or you want to set it back to a default, you could go do that. Now for MicroStation Connect, I thought I had this here too. Let me go back to disk here. We see function keys 10. Okay. So for MicroStation Connect, it's C program files, Bentley, MicroStation Connect edition, MicroStation default data. So here, at least I thought this was it. Maybe I was wrong and had the wrong thing set up for my function keys. Let me check here. It looks like I did. That was V8I. Thought I had my function key set up right. Did I? Default data. Font system. Well, my function key or my shortcut was not set up right here. So let me type func here and go find that again. Thought I checked that before I got here. There we go. So let me go to that folder, and then I'll show you where that folder is here. Nope, it did. I just missed the file, so it was the right location. So again, it's C program files, Bentley, MicroStation Connect edition, MicroStation default data, and instead of being in its own folder like I showed you earlier for V8I, it's then embedded within a data folder with a bunch of other files. So, and then you could make a copy of that and edit that directly if you wanted to, or make a copy of it and then edit through the interface in MicroStation Connect. Now, MicroStation Connect, if I go there, it's under File, Settings, Button Assignments. And so here's where you can edit those function keys is what I wanted. There we go, function keys. And you can edit that directly here or in the file proper. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to V8I here for a second. And I'm going to enter that AccuSnap command for function key 12 here. And I'll just highlight this and say AccuSnap toggle. Or I go to my key-in browser like I was showing you earlier and grab that command, copy it. I just did a Control-C. And then go back to Workspace, Function Keys, select what I want, and then paste that in. Same effect. Click OK. Now, when I go to place a line, I hit function key 12. Notice it now snaps, but if I hit function key 12, it took the snap off, and then when I turn it on again, so that's one way that can make things more efficient if you're running into problems with AccuSnap to where it's snapping when you don't want it to or not snapping when you want it to. You can just have it on a toggle like that and use that way. So that's function keys, and in combination with key-in commands. Now, you also have the same type of thing if you go to Workspace button assignments. So you have different button assignments for your mouse and also Alt, Shift, and Control keys that you could also do the same sort of thing for assignments here for the different buttons. In other words, you could use key-in commands to also set up different things for mouse clicks and combination of Shift, Control, and Alt clicks with mouse clicks to be able to execute key-in commands as well to make things more efficient for doing work when you're designing. So that's it on the function keys and the button assignments. Now I'm going to shift gears here and go into the next thing, which follows everything that I just showed you, because the key-in commands come into play here too. So you go utilities again, and then you go to batch process. Now this area gives you the ability to use key-in commands to where you can make bulk changes to design files using key-in commands in a batch processing like text file. So what you'll do is when you first come here, if you want to create a new one, you say create a new command file. You click here and give it a name. We'll say this is test 5. And if it already exists, you can say override it or not. And then it just comments out the crosshatch here, or the pound sign at the beginning. It's just a comment. And anything with that will be ignored. And then from here, I'm going to use, back in my view attributes, When I go back here, I'll go to text. So I'm going to turn on and turn off text with a keying command. In this case, I'm going to turn it off over a number of files using this as this file and then the batch process as an example. So when I go back to my text file, where to go here? All right. I'm going to say text off. And if I'm not sure what the command is, I go back to my keying command and say text. And notice that it does say off is one of the ones, so I'm going to say off. So I'll just type that into my command file. And then just like I showed you with the view attribute for fill, you have to tell it what view you want to do this in. So I'm going to say cell view 1. Then, just like I showed you with the view attribute for fill, I'm going to say update 1. So that's after I've got the view 1 saying that's where I want to turn off the text, then I say update 1, so it'll update that view. And then we'll go File, Design, to save that setting. Now I'll save that, close it, and notice it then gives the command file name here in this area, right here where it says command file. And then you click this button to add files or directories to process. So when I click that, I'm going to grab all of my clock design files, different numbers here. Click Done. And for initial model, you can either process all models or just default models only. It doesn't give you a lot of leeway, so it's either going to be all or just the default design model. In other words, if you wanted to just process sheet models, then you wouldn't be able to isolate them with using the batch processor itself. You may be able to, or if you want to do something like that, you might have to do some other things like separate out the sheet models into their own design file and then grab them and then say, update all models, and then it would do that in a separate design file. And that way it would leave any design or drawing models alone. But that's the only way I know of that you'd be able to isolate those. Or find other keying commands where you can isolate specific models, and after you've got them turned off, let's say the text turned off in all the views in all the models, you could then use a keying command to say, but in these other models, and name them explicitly with keying commands, saying then turn the text on in those particular models in the views you want. That's a little more complicated though. So now after you have this set up, you've got the command file with your keying commands, and you've got the list of files that you want to process. Then you click this button to process the batch job, and then it basically gives you a, is this what you really want to do sort of thing, which is this process is pending. And so now I'll say, yep, go ahead and process it. And it's going to process through all the files here. Might take it a little bit. You see the first one already, the active design file, it processed and turned the text off. And finally, it finished processing. And notice in the active design file, the text is turned off. And that happens to be the last one in the list is the current active file. And notice it did take some more time on 1 and 4. That might be, due to a wait state on the computer. There was something going on where it issued the command to do it, but then there was something else that the computer was doing in the background, so it took a little bit longer to process those. So that's done, and if I go back to my view attributes now, in fact, I'll go back to my original clock design file. All these files you processed, by the way, the last 10 of them are going to show up here in the last files processed. So if you need to go to one of those, you'll be able to select it here. And for some reason, it didn't do it in my first file on my list. Maybe I missed that file? No. So there's something wrong with my command. So I'd have to go back and debug that to find out why it still left text on in that particular design file. Now, with that done, that's the command file, and using the batch processor to take keying commands. And again, just like I showed you with the earlier stuff related to keying browser, you can type out the commands and And you could even test them the commands one at a time in the active design file to see if that's going to get you the output that you want. And once you're sure it does, then copy that command and paste it in your command file. And then grab the files that you want to do the bulk changes on. And again, any key-in commands you could then run through that batch processor to make bulk changes to your design files to update view attributes or attach a particular reference to all your files, or to scale a reference up or down, or turn level symbology on and off. And the amount of things that you could do using this is pretty much unlimited by what you have time to do and time to figure out, and then looking for and testing the commands to be able to put it together. So that's the batch processor. Now, when I go back to MicroStation Connect, the batch processor is not in the utilities area. When I go to the drawing workflow here, it's not here. Where it is, it's File, Tools. So under Tools, you have the batch process here. When I open that, you see it's the same dialog box, same ability to choose models or only default models, create the new command file, that sort of thing. All right, so now the next thing is MicroStation Visual Basic for Applications macros. Now, in V8i, that under Utilities is down here under Macro, and the way you want to access these is go through the Project Manager. And I think I've actually got that already. Yeah, I've already got it open. So when you first get here, I'll go File, Close, and now I'll go back. I had it open, but I actually want to open it to show you something here. So any command Visual Basic for Applications macros that you've used in the past will be listed here, but the default one will always load, and that's here. Now, where these are at, if I go on disk here and show you, let me get back to my central folder here. I've got shortcuts set up for all these things. So the Visual Basic for Applications macros are here. So for V8i, they're going to be down in the Program Data area, not Program Files, not Program Files x86, Bentley, MicroStation V8i Select Series, Workspace, System, VBA, and Examples. And this is example code that you could then open in Visual Basic for Applications Macros Editor and look at the code and wrap your wits around it. It is a programming language, so it's something, if you don't know any programming, you'll have to learn it a bit, and I'm actually going to give you some data on how you could do that using this example code and other things that MicroStation gives you to be able to learn and utilize Visual Basic Applications macros in MicroStation. And this one here is just a simple copy element example. So when I go here, I've already had that one loaded before, so I'm going to open it here and click Edit, and this opens it up in the editor. And in this particular case, this is one that was provided by Bentley, so this is the copyright. And then these are the actual commands or the programming language to put together this particular macro. So it's the option explicit is just the start of a routine. And then you have a subroutine, and the subroutine name is copy element. So the option explicit is just like an overall a catch-all for Visual Basic Applications macros. And then it gives you a comment here. It says the class, and this is the class copy element command, contains most of the implementation of this command. And so it's command state start locate new, and then it runs the copy element command, and then it ends the subroutine. Now, if some of this that I'm telling you is Greek to you, that's fine, because you could use this by running the command, and you click run here and it'll run it, or you can click this button here, and if you have an element selected, it would then copy that element. That's the simplicity of this particular Visual Basic for Applications macro. Now, how do you learn more about this? How do you go about, if you don't know anything about programming, one, or you maybe know a little bit from like handling some scripts or things like that, even working with the batch processor to a certain degree is like running a script. If you want to get more into this, then here's what you do. MicroStation V8i and Connect give you data or examples and lots of help on how you can learn the language of Visual Basic for applications. So if I go to, let me see where it is here, MicroStation folder. So if you go to your MicroStation V8i installation folder, which is C Program Files x86 Bentley, MicroStation V8i Select Series MicroStation, and I scroll down here, you'll see that it's got a MicroStation VBA compiled HTML help file, and also a VBA concept. So when I double-click these, notice it says this is the Visual Basic and VBA are thoroughly modern object-oriented programming environments used by professionals to develop applications. And if I click on this, it then runs you through how you load and run a VBA macro, loading a project, what the different objects are that you'll have to learn that you can work with in MicroStation files, and then learning the interface of the project manager, the macros dialog box, and the environment, and then also how you go about developing code in VBA. So it gives you all sorts of help related to these things. And in addition to that, if I close this and I go back to, where's it here, MicroStation VBA CHM, so this actually then gives you even more data. So it does go over the same data that I just showed you, but then it adds things like different things in the code, all the different objects, classes, types of things that you can work with. And even at the bottom, it gives you examples of, and the code that it gives you here are things that you can copy and paste into the MicroStation Visual Basic for Applications macros editor and then run it. And you could also then utilize this code, tweaking it from what you're learning to be able to write your own macros and do things that would enable you to do different processing on files. You can do bulk modifications. You could do special things like if you're running into something where maybe there's a specification thing where you've got a last-minute change on a specification and all the elements on certain levels actually need to have their color, weight, and style changed. And with a little bit of work, you could set up a macro, and then through the batch processor, you could then use a special key-in command to run the Visual Basic for Applications macros on a number of files at the same time to be able to handle things like changing the symbology of elements on certain levels in bulk, that sort of thing. It would take a little bit of work, but again, from the viewpoint of learning to become a guru, if you have some time, you can work with different examples. And as you run into different things in your production environment that might require some more automation that would make things more efficient and therefore save your company some money and save guys some time to where they can actually go home at a reasonable hour in the evening, that sort of thing. A little bit of work might, turn into something very beneficial for a particular project or a particular problem that you're running into on a project. So that's Visual Basic Applications macros. Now, that was the V8i side of things, and similarly for the Connect edition, if I go to, here's the VBA manager, and then the project name, you can create a new project or open. Let's see, where's my folder here? And then you can go down and you can open a particular project. If you don't have one, you can give it a file name and click Done, and if it's not there, it'll prompt you to create it. And if I go back to File, Tools, actually, am I in the right place here? I forgot. Nope. Actually, that was it. So the macros area, if you click on this box, it'll open the macros, which you can load and run from here as well. Same sort of data as you saw in V8i. And the help for Connect is down in the same type of area, but the folder is Program Files, instead of Program Files x86, Bentley, MicroStation Connect Edition, MicroStation. And when I scroll down, I think it's all the way, yeah, they grouped them at the bottom here. So this is the same VBA help file, but for Connect. And it even tells you that. So if there were new examples, so here's the example code here. If there's whatever's new for Connect, in other words, if there were changes to objects and classes and different functions and things like that, then for the Connect environment, those would all be here. And there are some changes. So you would just have to go through, if you're working in a Connect environment, and then learn the specific objects and commands and things like that that you can use with VBA for Connect. All right, so that's the next to last thing. The last thing I'm going to cover is the batch converter. Now, if you work in an environment where sometimes you need to convert large numbers of MicroStation files or to AutoCAD or the opposite direction, then MicroStation has, through its own translator, a built-in functionality for you to be able to do that. And if you go in V8i to Utilities, Batch Converter, then through here you can go File, Open, and you can create a new Batch Converter project. I've already started one here. I just called it New. I didn't put anything in it yet. But after you've got it open, then you can set the output format that you want to do. Let's say I want to take MicroStation files and I want to output them as DWG or AutoCAD files. Then if I go to Edit, you'll see that it's got options here. So it's DWG save options that I want to use. You click that, and then you do things like you choose the version of AutoCAD that you want to save out as, and when you click this, you can then choose the different versions that MicroStation V8i gives you the ability to do so. And notice it stops, though, at 2016. Now, this was kind of a little bit of a sore thumb for people using V8i because you don't actually have functionality to open or save out AutoCAD 2017 and above files until MicroStation Connect, I think, update 11 or 12. So, and I know this because people that we deal with when it comes to helping with translations, which we have a program that helps do that, have run into that sort of thing. So it's just something that I point out. Also, all the other settings, you go under Advanced. There's different settings for unsupported line styles. So all sorts of different settings, in this case, to save out your DWG files when it comes to doing a batch conversion of your MicroStation files. You would then click Add Files or Directories to Convert, grab your MicroStation files that you want to save out as AutoCAD, click Done, and then just like in the batch process, you click this button to process the batch conversion job, and it would output the files to the folder that you name here. This is a default folder, but if you want to select a different one, you just click Browse for Destination, grab that folder, and it'll put the output files there. And also then, if I go back to Edit, you'll see it does have settings for saving out if you're going from AutoCAD to MicroStation. You could also do that translation from here. And you have V8 save options and also V7 save options. And then you have settings for your log file, like where you want the log file for the process to be output. Now this interface is something that you can use in addition to or outside of using the command line driven translator, which the MicroStation and also AutoCAD both have a command line driven translator, but this kind of puts some of that stuff all into one little interface, which makes it a little easier for people to deal with instead of having to go through the settings in MicroStation separately and then running from a command line process. This kind of ties that all into one little interface here. So those things that I covered with a little bit of work and a little bit of looking at what you're running into in a particular environment and knowing where things are based on the tools that I showed you, and a little bit of work and playing around with it when you have a little bit of spare time. I know that's kind of hard to carve out, but time spent particularly in the key and commands area will net you probably benefit more quicker than trying to slog through and learn some of the Visual Basic application macros, simply because that's going to be a little bit more work than working with key and commands and running the batch processor. That's a little bit more straightforward, and it's a little bit more forgiving because it's not a programming environment per se. But even with that, despite that, even though it's not a fully blown programming environment with the batch processor, there's tons of things you can do with key-in commands that would be on the order of what you could do with Visual Basic applications for macros. The thing about Visual Basic applications macros that kind of expand on that is you can do things down at the individual element level and also with processing files in ways that you can't do with just the batch processor. Like you can rename files and save things temporarily while you're checking something else in files with a VBA macro, and then once that's done, pull those files that you have saved temporarily and then process those, that sort of thing. All right, now I'm going to shift gears here a little bit. Oh, actually, I forgot one thing related to Connect. Now, the same tool, the batch converter, if you go to the File menu, Tools, so here's the batch converter for Connect. It's the same setup, same outputs, same options that you saw, just like you had in the V8i environment. All right, so now I'll go back to MicroStation V8i, and I'm going to open up a sample file. I'm going to show you a couple of things related to Axiom tools that will kind of expand on and also help as far as you becoming a MicroStation guru, because they're somewhat related to the items that I just showed you as far as what you have tools for in MicroStation. But in many cases, they're easier, and they give you things that you can utilize that you don't fully have with just the MicroStation tools. So the first thing I'm going to do is open up, and I'm just going to do a quick overview of these things. I won't have time with the time we've got in the webinar to go into these in any depth, really. But I'm just going to cover like 4 programs. I'm just going to show you the dialog boxes and explain a couple things, and you'll see what I mean. So the first program, and when you install them in the MicroStation V8i environment, you get this Axiom menu selection here off your main MicroStation menu. And the first program I'm going to go into is Global File Changer. The reason I'm going into this is because this program gives you the ability to make bulk changes to design files like you can with the batch processor, but it gives you more capabilities in terms of you can tell it specific elements in files to select, and you also have better options for what exact models you want to process, and you can even tell it the model name filter using wildcards to tell it what exact model names you want to process as well. And in addition, with this checkbox option, you can say process reference files as well. Now you see here it has a key-in file, and this is what that name is it's a text file with a .key extension, and you use key-in commands in it, just like I showed you earlier from the key-in browser, to help you make bulk changes down to the element level and symbology level of your design files, all in one fell swoop. So you could use this to make the same types of changes to tens, hundreds, thousands, even tens of thousands of design files in one fell swoop if you needed to. The thing that makes it a bit different and also more efficient and better than the batch processor is if you click Selection and go Element Selection, this is an element selection tool that we developed, and it looks similar to, if you're familiar with Select by Attributes, it's similar to that, but it's like that on steroids. And I'm going to open up a selection file that was created for it for this particular design file, just to show you how this is set up. So what you do is you give it names, and then you associate selection criteria for the elements that you want to process. So in this example, you see it has lines, has element type line associated with it, hands has shape, numbers as text, faces ellipse or circle. And these are very general selection sets, but you can get more specific as needed by saying, I only want lines on the lines level, and the colors you can set, the weights, the styles, the classes of elements, even graphic group numbers. You can even set regions in design files that you say, okay, only look in this specific area or of the design files I'm processing. So you can get very specific. You can even say for each element type, you see this triangle here to the right or arrowhead, you click it and it gives you element-specific criteria that you can further set to isolate this is the exact elements I want to select for processing. Once you set this up in the key-in file, you then tell it the name of your selection file. You then, for the first file that you process in your list, after you click Select and you grab the files that you want to make the changes to, you then tell it to activate a selection set in the first file. So what this does is this looks in your selection file, and in this case it looks for the lines selection set, and then it activates the selection criteria to select those elements. In this case it would just be lines. And then you see it's got key-in commands that it then uses to make changes to those elements. And then it just processes through all the changes that you would key in with key-in commands, using the key-in browser to help you put those commands together. And then when it's done processing one file, it'll then go to the next file on the list and then do the same thing over and over until it handles all the files. Now that's one part of Global File Changer. It's very big, it's very freeform. There's a lot you can do with it. And it does give you, if I click select here, when you install the program, a bunch of different key files that you can use as templates to build your own, but also it'll give you ideas of things that you could do with the program that you might not have otherwise thought of. It also has a custom menu which has tools on it that give you the ability through custom commands that people have paid us for programming for to add to it, or it has tools on it that people have requested so often we went ahead and added it ourselves. The most popular tool here is Modify Text, and this gives you the ability to modify any type of text over any number of design files that you want at the same time. You can even do text substitutions with this here. So you can say find this part number and replace it with this part number in any number of design files, and other substitutions like that if you wanted to. If you don't change anything in the general and advanced tabs and you just do the text substitution, then it will leave everything else about those text elements alone, meaning it would just do the text substitution, but it would leave the font, the symbology, the rotation, everything else alone unless you explicitly told it to change those things. So that's Global File Changer. Another tool which is kind of oriented to that is Spec Checker. This is a tool that gives you the ability to run a set of files against what's called a rule file, which is something that you set up with a companion tool called Rule Manager, to basically check the specifications of those design files down to the element level. Now the rule file will, or the Rule Manager I should say, gives you the ability to scan a set of design files, and it will create rules based on the setup of them down to the element and symbology level. They'll be what are called accept rules. Now, if those files that you scan to create that set of rules from don't quite match your specifications yet, or the specifications you need them to, then you can go in through the Rule Manager and edit that rule file to then tweak the rules to make sure that they do match your specifications. You can also add special rules called reject rules, which are kind of the opposite of accept rules. Accept says if it matches this criteria, the element's good. Reject says if it matches this criteria, it's bad. But with a reject rule, you can add automated fixing. So for example, if you said, look in a reject rule, look on a particular level and reject any elements that do not match the level symbology for that level. So we'd say color not equal to, weight not equal to, style not equal to, whatever the level symbology is. So any elements that appear on that level that do not match the level symbology, it would then reject them, but you could then add a correction statement which would say, well, make them match the level symbology. And through the use of reject rules, you can automate things that are commonly found as far as that are out where people are missing things in specifications. So it'll automate the process of being able to check files before you submit them to your client, that sort of thing. So that's Spec Checker. And then we also have Ref Manager. And the reason I mentioned this is because I mentioned the key-in commands for reference files. There's a bunch of them, not only with attach, but also for changing level symbology and reference file level display and things like that. So you can do that sort of thing and more with Ref Manager. It gives you, it's basically a bulk reporting and a bulk modification tool for reference file attachments. So it has a bunch of different, it has a reference file attachment report in V8i. It also has a cross-reference report. The cross-reference report doesn't exist yet in Connect, but it will here eventually. And then it also has a report to tell you which references are missing. And then on top of that, above the line, it's got Modify is probably the main tool used here. And you could use things like, or you could change things like change the level display in bulk, and you could do this in a fashion that makes it more efficient. For example, if you needed to change the level display for a particular reference file that was attached to, let's say, 1,000 master files, and you needed that level display to be the same no matter where that reference file was attached, then with Ref Manager, here's what we'd have you do. Grab one master file that has that reference, change the level display to what you want it to be, then through this tool, click Match, navigate out, pick up that master file, and then through this attachment file name, you would pick that attachment that you changed the level display settings for, close this, then you would grab all the master files that have that reference that you want to apply those level display settings to, and then you would isolate that specific reference through this attachment filtering, file name. You can set it specifically if that's it, but you also have other categories, so you can very exactly say, this is the exact reference that I want to change the level display for. And then you click Start, and then it would batch process using those settings for that one reference where you change the level display, and it would apply it to wherever that attachment was attached. And there's other tools here where you can change the slot order, and you can detach references in bulk. You can copy reference file attachments, clone or replace them, and change the update sequence of the active design file versus its vector and raster references. And lastly, under Axiom, the tools that I went over, the first three were all in our MicroStation Productivity Toolkit for V8. But the next I'm going to show you is TitleBlock Manager, which is these tools, these two tools together. But in TitleBlock Administrator, it gives you tools to be able to extract data from title blocks, and whether they're in tag form, simple text element form, shared cell form, or regular cell form, and it'll export that data out to a spreadsheet or Microsoft Access database, where you could then update data like sheet numbers, sheet totals, any other data that you needed to update in those title blocks, and then you shift the viewpoint of the program to update the selected design files from the database. So, and you can process any number of files doing that, and the data that you export out to the spreadsheet, you could then repurpose in other ways. For example, it'll list all the files, the full path and file name, and you could repurpose that data to help you maybe put together a sheet inventory or something like that if you needed to do so. There might be other uses for the data that you can extract out, but again, the purpose is to be able to extract copies of that data out and then push it back in after you update it. But again, there might be other purposes or uses that you could think of that data that you extract from your title blocks might be useful for. So that's the overview of the four tools of Axiom that somewhat tie into the earlier how to become a MicroStation guru portion of things. And in combination with the things that I showed you in the first part of the webinar and using some Axiom tools, you have a bunch of tools available in both aspects where it can make things more efficient, and you can handle things that maybe are tedious in terms of bulk processing things, where if you had to do updates or things like that one file at a time, where it would be cost or time prohibitive due to having to do a submittal and you have a bunch of things that you need to correct or fix in design files, that sort of thing, then the tools I showed you in the first part will majorly, without any additional thing, get you tools that you can use to make things more efficient in the types of scenarios I gave you already. And then in addition, with some Axiom tools, that could even enhance that even further. So with that, that's all I have for the webinar. I'm going to look here to see if there were any questions related to what I went over here before I sign off. Let me get back there because I've lost my place here. So Q&A. So let me see. I've got one question. It says, I'm a CAD manager. Is this a video I can share with new users in my department, or can I direct them to you for intros? The answer to that question is the video I will make available. So yes, you will be able to use it. In addition, if you want, if you have people that you want to be able to, for me to show them things more directly, we can make arrangements for that. Most of the times when we do one-on-ones like that, they're oriented to MicroStation tools, but I could potentially do a smaller group of this same type of webinar if that was needed too. That's to answer that first question. And then, let me see. Can you show an example of how to replace a cell with a batch process? There is a tool. I'm glad. I see what time. It's after 3 here. I know people are going to start leaving. There is a tool actually in Global File Changer that does that specifically, and it's one of the custom menu tools. So if you go back, custom replace cells, you select the cell library with the replacement cell or cells, and then you click add, and you give it the name of the replacement cell and then the name of the cell that you're replacing. And then you can match them up by origin or center, and go that way, and you could bulk replace them over any number of design files you want. You could potentially do the same sort of thing in key-in commands. That would take a little bit of work to figure out, and it would actually probably be better as I'm thinking through this. I don't think that's something that you could do through a key-in command. It might be though, as I'm thinking through this. But if not, you could set it up through a MicroStation Visual Basic Applications macro. That would be a little bit more work, but the combination of the two would probably be useful to answer that question. And then, are batch processes 100% reliable when working in the project-wise environment? Will there be any timeout errors? That's a very good question. So based on what I know of working in the project-wise environment, it should be reliable. And I say that simply because I know the Bentleys have a lot invested in making sure that that particular environment is set up to where it can be used reliably. And that would include the tools that MicroStation itself can utilize in conjunction with being logged into your project-wise data source. So the answer to that question was, I would expect it to be reliable. Now, will there be timeout errors? There's a possibility, depending on your connection and other things that the project-wise environment or the server, that however you've got it set up, that it could potentially introduce some timeout errors. But in both cases, or in all cases when it comes to processing with Visual Basic Applications macros, there's a way that you, through that programming language, you can set up the ability to output a log file. And so once the processing is done, you could go look at that. And in addition, with the batch processor, there is an area where, I forgot where it's located for MicroStation, but you can look through the help file for MicroStation and find it, where the output, and it might even be through the configuration variables, where it will output log files, so you could go back and check the batch processing environment and see if there were things that it failed due to a timeout or something like that. So that would give you help in that regard. So that's, I'm going to end off then because just because we've gone over a little bit of time, and I'm going to display on the screen here before I go, help about here. Any Axiom program, you go to its help menu and click about, and it runs this, opens this particular HTML file. And the reason I'm doing this is to give you contact information. If you have questions after the fact, or you want to find out more about the different Axiom tools that I went over or other tools we have, you can call this number, 727-442-7774, and ask for sales. And if they need to, they can get you directly to someone like myself in our technical area, and we can give you one-on-one demonstrations of those particular things, answer your questions as much as you need. In addition, you could also email us at support@axiomint.com and give us what questions you have, and every one of our technical division personnel like myself are on support duty, so we all have access to that, and we'll be able to answer your questions in that regard too. So with that, I'm going to stop recording here in just a second. Thank you very much for attending, everybody, and it looks like I did get through all of the questions. I appreciate you attending. Thank you very much. I hope this data is useful to you, and I hope you can use it, with a little bit of work and figuring out what you might need to apply to handle some particular thing you're running into in your own work environment, that it will end up being very useful to you. So that's all.